What is up, coin traders? Thanks for joining me for the show. Going to look at Kaspa, K-A-S on that ticker. A lot of upside for Kaspa and obviously a lot of cooling down as well, especially since zooming out, you can see lots of gains ever since the crypto actually launched here on a lot of exchanges. So even from the low, looking at over 43x gains, 4,200%, even up to the all-time high right now, about 7,000%. So about 71x on that. If we actually look over at CoinMarketCap, number 42 right now, not necessarily offered on a lot of other exchanges right now, and most trading is based on the Tether pairing, obviously with a couple of Bitcoin pairings here and there. And so, yeah, looking at the overall price chart, just a huge amount of rally in just over a year and a half or so. So a lot of hype and in the spotlight for Kaspa, rightfully so, especially with a pretty good performing chart like this. So I am expecting a pretty good run out of Kaspa for this upcoming cycle, just since it is still maintaining a very nice structure and trend, and it is one of those names that is going to be getting in the spotlight and kind of some of the hype a little bit. So since it is one of those shiny and new altcoin projects, definitely thinking we're going to see a lot of great things, despite the fact that we've already seen such a huge run up in such a short amount of time here. Now, I want to spend some time on the daily and actually look at the current structure and setup, because we did have this very nice rally from the start of February up until about the middle of February, rallied about 100%. Then from there, actually looking at a current pullback right now of less than 40%. So actually pretty good compared to what a lot of the rest of the cryptos have been doing in this amount of time, being that they have been pulling back 40, 50, 60% plus. So still a pretty good sign to be pulling back this much, maintaining higher lows and a pretty good level of closing support too. So if we look at the last week's worth of daily candles, you can see that right now holding very nice closing support on top of about 11.31 cents. So this does mean that even looking left farther too, very nice points of closing support on these Kaspa charts, making a little bit of stair-stepping pattern. So as you can see on this overall big point of support, barely saw prices come down and touch this level, but then obviously had a pretty big struggle and a defense on the daily close of this level as well. And for that, coming in at 9.76 cents. Obviously above that was a pretty strong previous resistive and now supportive point as well. So as you can see, looking left, resistance prior to that, we saw it as big points of closing support as well. So making a very nice zone. So right now, this is a downside target if in fact we do break 1131. Not necessarily any guarantees for that, but on this overall pullback, especially with a lot of cryptos right now, could still see some farther downside, especially in this pattern after breaking this type of daily structure. So ran up, finally pulled back, lower high, broke bearish, confirming some of these, and then obviously getting stuck on this double bounce attempt for the price for that, looking at a resistance level coming in at 14.82 cents. So rejection happened twice in two separate attempts from this before breaking this structure now and did set our low. So current low for price is 10.45 cents for Kaspa right now on the current pullback. So if we can actually maintain support on top of that specifically, we would love to see this big level of support hold for the daily close at 1131. If that happens, then likely we would experience a little bit more upside. But right now, just based on this type of pattern, we know that we're probably going to get a few more tests and attempts to actually have a bearish break below the supportive level, which would mean a big test of this big zone that we actually found as our period of support prior to the run up right now to the all-time high. So what that would actually mean is that if we actually test this zone, we would potentially be in jeopardy of breaking the long-term structure, since that could potentially see prices going below 9.3 cents. If that does happen, then that will be a break of the longer-term structure, and we will know that this is going to be the trend high that has been set for a little bit until we can actually shift and actually readjust the trend high to reclaim some of those longer trend charts. But with that said, I actually want to flip over into the weekly chart, just because we know that a lot of these cryptos are holding very nice weekly structure, and especially seeing 2 months of pullbacks, nothing necessarily that bad for a lot of these cryptos, especially after seeing so much gains. So these are the great dip buying opportunities that we always see, because in healthy and normal markets, this is exactly what we do need to see. So big periods of upside and long, slow, drawn out periods of pullback. So unfortunately, the periods of upside are always quick and exciting. And that's kind of one of the things about crypto, is it does take a lot of patience for just a short period of time, which is kind of one of the reasons why a lot of people do have issues and some questions about when to sell and how to sell and things like that, just because the upside is so quick and so aggressive. And then obviously these pullbacks are pretty long and painful, but we know they are always essential and necessary for these type of markets. So being that this is a weekly chart, know that it does take a while to actually play out. But since now we are in supportive zones coming in, this is pretty much what you want to be looking for, especially if you do want to be buying dip and making new entries. Not financial advice, obviously, but that's just pretty much good, solid, fundamental strategy for these type of pullbacks. So big rally, you do want to be buying on the dip next to support, which is pretty much exactly where we're at right now. Now, the price level zones that we actually put up on the screen from the daily are extremely relevant for this weekly chart. So if we actually look at the weekly looking left, big points of weekly resistance coming in at 1131. So we know that that's very relevant for the current weekly candle, and the fact that we are maintaining current weekly candle support on top of that's definitely huge, especially with less than half an hour left on the current weekly candle before we actually see the start of next. So very likely right now that we're going to be able to hold this defensive level, which was confirmed as previous level of resistance. So if we can do that and see further upside and a little bit of follow through for next week, like we could especially anticipate, then that's pretty much going to be one of those good signs letting us know that this is going to be a confirmed bottom coming in and likely going to be experiencing a little bit more upside as well. Now, do want to look a little bit more at this weekly structure, because if we look at the exponential moving averages, mostly you can see that support has been coming in between the 12 and 26 period EMA. Obviously a little bit below this area, in which case if we did see this 50 period EMA extend, obviously this chart is still so new that we didn't get a 50 period EMA in that instance, but right now you can pretty much assume that that would have been support on top of the 50 period EMA as well, in between the 26 and 50 that is. So ever since we have been seeing support come in between the 12 and 26, and so even now on this current pullback, little bit of dip and shadows behind this 26. So we know that that's going to be an extremely supportive zone as well. So even looking left on the previous retrace and attempt, held the 26 for a little bit, finally broke below it, but then did see a little bit of wick buying down in that zone between the 12 and 26 EMAs. Now, one thing that we do have to go ahead and look at right now is just the technicals for Kaspa right now, because a lot of interesting things happening. Specifically, we want to talk about this RSI relative strength index, because coming off of the move, we saw our initial high come in back in March of 23, so over a year ago, when we were looking at a high for the weekly RSI for Kaspa, coming in at 92.07. So ever since, even on this short little run up that came in middle of November after the fall rally, we were looking at the high coming in for RSI 87.5, and then even on the current move up to the all-time high, looking at 74.14. So 3 different attempts and 3 lower lows, yet meanwhile we saw 3 higher highs in the price. So typically we usually see 2 points of data for this bearish divergence. In this case, we are starting to see 3, which does mean trend slowing down, of course. Now, do want to look at stochastic RSI, because that's also extremely relevant, especially knowing that we are below the 20 line and scouting a bullish cross, kind of like we've seen previously, and then even on the move back in May of 23 as well. So the only 3 times right now on this chart that we've seen stochastic RSI below the 20 line, we have seen a pullback, bullish cross, and then an upside rally and a push from there, which has ultimately resulted in a price action and price gain. So typically we see at least 100% gain from this, not necessarily claiming that's what we'll see right now. But for example, looking at previously, even if we go to the short-term trends here, looking at the low to the high, about 260% from this low to the current trend, or the previous trend high, 260% as well. And then on this move as well, it's up to the all-time high, 100%. Now, interestingly enough, if we actually want to look at volume a little bit more, you can see how the volume peaks have pretty much just declined. And then even on the recent move up to the all-time high, just an extremely little and low amount of bullish volume here, pushing prices up to the all-time high. But previously, prior to that, pretty decent increasing bullish volume. And even before that, increasing bullish volume up to our peak. And that was the the end of March in 23. So I expect right now, especially with a decreasing bearish divergence RSI, that we could get a little bit more of a tighter equilibrium, as we do see a little bit more playoff and sideways trading kind of coming in for the rest of crypto, which also probably is going to play off on Kaspa as well. So assuming we have found our bottom, I would expect a little bit more upside, but that's not necessarily a guarantee we're going to top out and see a new all-time high coming in here soon. But obviously nothing is impossible in crypto, especially if we do maintain support on a lot of EMAs. and then finally do end up getting a little bit of flood of new bullish volume. But pretty much right now, after these types of patterns where we have huge run-ups, pullbacks, another breakout again, but not necessarily that much higher than what we saw previously. So for example, if we actually look at how much this actually broke and pushed prices above the previous all-time high, it's only about 22%, which for this type of breakout, basically, especially from a nice flag pattern type consolidation kicking off a 12-period EMA, we would expect this to actually see a little bit more upside than what we did. So kind of this is normal, especially with low volume. And when we actually have retracements this much as well using a Fibonacci, we know that we are holding 78.6% support, but that's typically one of the levels that we look at to know that we're not necessarily going to get an immediate rush to see a new all-time high anytime soon. So typically when we do see retracements this much, that does lead to a little bit of longer term accumulation and potentially a run up where we're going to see a lower high, try to establish a higher low, and that could be the instance where the bulls try to push higher once again. But we also know that this trend's been pretty consistent. So low, high, higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low, and then finally higher high on the all-time high, pulling back for that higher low. So very nice, consistent, longer-term uptrend, but right now it's pretty much just going to come down to establishing this overall level as a longer-term support and then kind of allow this volume to kick back up again after confirming this and showing a little bit more sideways chop and probably some kind of boring sideways action if I had to guess. Like we said, though, definitely no calls for a bottom to be in just yet, since we are thinking that this current pattern could end up breaking bears to test some of these lower support levels. So ultimately, we think that even though we have seen some support come in for the weekly, doesn't mean necessarily this upcoming week we couldn't see a further sell-off and a little bit more pressure to the downside before finally seeing prices rally to the upside once again. Would love to know everyone's thoughts, comments, predictions, and all of that down in the comments sections below, though, what you think's likely to happen right now out of Kaspa, and if we think we're going to be seeing a little bit more upside or this pullback has been sufficient enough. So yeah, with that actually is going to go ahead and wrap up the show for today. Hope everyone enjoyed this update on Kaspa, KAS on that ticker. If you did, please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you have not done so just yet. Don't forget to drop me a follow over on Twitter or X at coin_trades is the handle. Looking forward to chatting with everyone over there. Do appreciate all the continued love and support, as always, means so much. Stay safe, take care, and I'll catch you back in the next video.